Welcome to Protea Weekly. This week, I wanted to continue my conversation about contribution margin. The more time I spend thinking about contribution margin, talking about contribution margin, and looking at ways to calculate it easy for our clients, the more I'm convinced that this is one of the most important numbers that most people aren't looking at. Obviously, Protea Financial focuses in on the wine industry, where I think this is a very important number that all wineries should be looking at. I'm also convinced that this is a very good number for all businesses to take a look at, especially when sales are involved. It's important to know what the true cost of that revenue is once taking into account the cost to make the sale. Where I become even more convinced this number is important is when you have salespeople involved. One of the biggest problems that we see with wineries is that they over-index on the number of employees to hit their sales targets. This is especially relevant in the space of wholesale. We've often run into clients where they have multiple salespeople, and when you start doing the calculations of contribution margin, and even simple contribution margin, where we're just looking at sales, less cost of goods sold, less shipping, less billbacks, less salary. And it becomes very clear that the labor is either not efficient in making enough sales or that they have too many people for the amount of sales they're able to make. Now that might sound like two different sides of the same coin, but it is important for you to understand that sometimes people will have to employ multiple people because they are servicing a large market. Now, when you do contribution margin, you can start thinking about it in much more specific terms and go, great, we're trying to cover this large population of people, so we need multiple people. But if the two salaries combined is leading us to a break-even situation or a very low margin situation, does this necessarily make sense? Now, the short answer will be is we're producing that much wine, we have to sell that wine. And that could be part of the answer, especially if your sales into distribution is pushing customers towards your wholesale, is pushing customers towards your DTC business where you make larger margins. The good thing about contribution margin, especially looking at it from a whole channel standpoint, allows you to start having conversations and figure out where do the problems lie. For distribution, it could be that you just have a bad contract with your distributor and it's costing you too much for them to represent you. It could be that you have an ineffective salesperson, or it could be that you're in a market that doesn't actually make sense for your business because there's not a large enough market for it to make economic sense. So I say start at the channel level and then start digging deeper. Can you split and see the performance of each of your salespeople? Can you then go even further and look at the performance in the individual markets that they represent? This will give you the opportunity to see if it's a salesperson problem or a market problem and allow you to make adjustments along the way. The one thing that people don't like about contribution margin is that they start having to have hard conversations, especially around human capital. In this scenario, you will most likely identify that either both or one of the salespeople is ineffective and most likely needs to be separated from their job and either replaced with a new salesperson or make a decision to not represent those regions with a salesperson or ask your better performer to handle all the regions. Looking at contribution margin allows you to really analyze what is going on in your business and make those difficult decisions to allow you to be as profitable as possible. Now, obviously, I do want to warn, even though certain markets might have poor contribution margin, that does not necessarily mean it is a bad place to be. Especially when you're looking at distribution, it's important to look at the contribution margin of each one of those markets. And if the margins aren't great, analyze, is there any other benefits for being in this space? The best way to look at this is then go and have a deep dive and see how well your website or club is doing from that market. If you are over-indexed on the number of customers in that space that are coming to your website, it is very possible that even at a low contribution margin, it still makes sense to be in that distribution market because it is driving your direct-to-consumer sales. That is generally a net positive, as generally speaking, direct-to-consumer sales hold better gross margins and then almost always better contribution margins. Looking at your contribution margin is just the start of the conversation and allows you to have real talk about what is actually going on in your business and where should you actually be spending your time. For a lot of businesses, direct-to-consumer channels are the ideal place to be looking at contribution margin to see if your efforts are worth the time and energy. For wineries in particular, there are many different versions of direct-to-consumer sales, but you can start at the overall picture of the whole channel and try to figure out what is your overall contribution margin. Then I suggest splitting it down into your core areas and assessing each one of them to see how much they're contributing to the overall business. This could be your tasting room, this could be online, this could be through a newsletter, could be through a club or a subscription program. In some regions, especially when you have more than just a tasting room on site and maybe it's more of an entertainment space, you also want to assess how well are those entertainment spaces doing and are they contributing to the sales of your wine? Especially out on the East Coast where a lot of people have to compete to get people into their doors, live music or acts can be part of the business model. A lot of the time when you look at the contribution margin of the live acts, they will show a negative contribution margin. Now, that may or may not be a good thing, depending on what is happening once you get people in the door. Remember, sometimes getting people in the door is your entrance price. Once they're in, how do you use that time that they're in your facility to showcase your wines and make sure that they become returning customers? This is a situation on how much wine do you sell during those events, and more importantly, how many of these customers can you convert into club members with recurring revenue, and generally speaking, higher lifetime spending. Contribution margin is important, but it cannot be looked at in isolation. Obviously, if it is extremely negative, it is hard to balance that against any other factor, but let's not let the financials totally dictate our decisions per channel. Contribution margin is just the starting point, and this will then lead to some consultation with your team, with your advisors, and even sometimes just with your heart. You'll have to make a decision. Is this low or negative contribution margin worthwhile because it feeds another part of our business in a positive way? And generally speaking, that channel needs to be extremely profitable. I want more people to start looking at their contribution margin. Truly understand how much a channel or a market is contributing to the overall success of your business. Remember, when you're looking at contribution margins, it also gives you a sense of how much overheads you can invest in your business. Businesses could have a problem where there's not enough sales, their cost of goods is too high, their contribution margin is too low, or they just have too many overheads. We often see this when there's a lot of founders in place and they're all taking salaries and doing very similar jobs. Sometimes we have to make some hard decisions around our overheads and make necessary cuts to allow us to be successful. Contribution margin is a great way to look at your business and make some hard decisions. I want you all to reach out to your accountant today and ask them to help you build out your contribution margins by channel. Good luck. My name is Zane Stevens. I'm the founder of Protea Financial. Until next time.